Okay, we're continuing with the book here, Best Christian Art by Pete Rogers. That's me. We're now going to talk about paintings of a shipwreck. And the reason for this, almost all the chapters in this book are just painting after painting, but there is a little bit of text in the book. And in this particular instance, the painting of the shipwreck, it reminded me of the philosophy of Jose Ortega Gasset. And I thought his philosophy was quite interesting. Part of the idea is the idea of a person who is shipwrecked. And what Gasset is saying is that you sometimes have to hit rock bottom, if you will, before you look up and you start to figure out what's going on. And I've had several experiences in my life where I've kind of been knocked down pretty low, and how I bounced out of it. And there's a systematic way to bounce out of failures, mistakes, and setbacks. And so I think you might find it helpful. Also, the idea of the person who really learns is the person who's desperate for knowledge. That a lot of people only study to try to get a grade in school, but then they forget everything. Versus if you're really trying to understand something, really trying to understand how to become healthy or to solve some other problem in your life, you remember that pretty well. So here's the painting we ended up on the last lecture on from this book, and it's Seaport at Night by Claude Joseph Vernet. So it's a beautiful painting of the seaport in the evening with the ships. Okay, the next one is a painting by a Russian painter. It's called The Ninth Wave by Aivazovsky. Okay, and I always like to show Russian painters from the 1800s to show how great they were in the 1800s, and then how Russia just went into the garbage can once it adopted, atheistic Darwinism type views. But anyways, magnificent painting, The Ninth Wave by Aivazovsky. Okay, now the next one's going to be another painting by Vernet. Okay, and this one is The Shipwrecked by Claude Joseph Vernet. All right, and I love this painting because it's the idea of, man, when the S hits the fan, how do you bounce back from that? So now we're going to talk, I'm going to go through some quotes by this Spanish philosopher, Jose Ortega Gasset. To live is to feel oneself lost. He who accepts this has already begun to find himself, to be on firm ground. Instinctively, as do the shipwrecked, he will look around for something to cling to, and that tragic glance is sincere because it is a question of his salvation. It will cause him to bring order into the chaos of his life. Yeah, when you really need to learn, man, you learn. Okay, it's not for a test, this is for your life. Okay, these are the only genuine ideas, the ideas of the shipwrecked. All the rest is rhetoric, posturing, and farce. Tell me what you pay attention to, and I will tell you who you are. Civilization is nothing but the attempt to reduce force to being the last resort. The will to be oneself is heroism. Okay, so now you'll hear echoes of Kierkegaard. So Soren Kierkegaard was the Danish Socrates, okay? And I've written all about Kierkegaard in my book of quotes, okay? But, of course, Jose Ortega Gasset and this concept of the shipwreck, it really resonates with me because you have to be able to recognize when you're on your own, no one's going to help you. Like with a health problem, you're going to have to solve it yourself. If you're lucky, a doctor might help you, but a lot of times you got to figure it out yourself. Luckily, there's a lot of videos on the internet that can help you to do that. All the playlists at this channel for the common diseases. Okay, Jose Ortega Gasset continues. Effort is only effort when it begins to hurt. To wonder is to begin to understand. Estar is to be studying in biology. Ser is to see yourself as a biologist. Yeah, that's, I think, how I got good at school. Was, man, I wanted to be a biologist, and so then I got good at biology because I was hanging around with other guys that wanted to be biologists rather than just taking a test. Okay, Gasset continues. The student who sees himself as a member of the club as a young biologist will learn faster than the grade-seeking student and remember better. Oh, that was my quote. Okay, now here's Gasset. Every living creature is happy when he fulfills his destiny. That is when he realizes himself. When he is being that which in truth he is. Okay, now that's very much like the quote by, Watson, who came later, Watson and Crick, who basically said an animal's happy when it does what it was meant to do. A horse is happy when it's run. When it runs. So if you like being a scholar, you'll be happy when you're studying. If you like, doing something else, playing tennis, you'll be happy when you play tennis. Okay, Gasset continues. The man who discovers a new scientific truth has previously had to smash almost everything he had learned. And he arrives at that new truth with his hands blood-stained from the slaughter of 1,000 platitudes. Yes, that's why medicine, conventional medicine, hates smart people. If you just go along and conform to the standard of care and you generate a lot of money for your hospital, your clinic, or whatever, the drug companies, they'll be happy with you and everything will be cool. You'll get your money, nobody will bug you. If, on the other hand, you try to really understand things to create a better paradigm of disease causation or treatment, they will hate your guts. They will do whatever they can to make your life miserable because you're going to potentially interfere with their money-making system. So that's the paradox, that medicine doesn't want to cure the patient. It's bizarre, but it's true. Okay. Gasset continues. Let me actually cycle this a little farther along. It is enough to compare the approach of a man who is going to study an already existing science with the approach of a man who feels a real, sincere, and genuine need for it. The former, the student, will tend not to question the content of the science and not to criticize it. On the contrary, he will tend to comfort himself by thinking that the content of the science, which already exists, has a defined value, is pure truth. That's how I was. I used to think these are like, the ultimate books, like the Harvard textbooks of pathology and stuff and physiology and cardiovascular disease. Now I look at those books as comic books. Okay, Gasset continues. What he seeks simply is to assimilate it as it already is. On the other hand, the man who is needful of a science, he who feels a profound necessity of truth, will approach this bit of ready-made knowledge with caution, full of suspicion, submitting it to criticism, even assuming in advance what the book says is not true. In short, for the very reason that he needs with such deep anguish to know, he will think that this knowledge does not exist, and he will manage to unmake what is presented as already made. It is men like this who are constantly correcting, renewing, and recreating science. Yeah, if you're scared you're going to die of a heart attack like Pritikin was with his, proven coronary artery disease on his EKG test and whatnot, you want to figure it out and figure out the truth. Okay, so Pritikin dug through all the literature on dietary fat, and after studying it quite extensively, writing about it quite extensively, Pritikin wrote, "Fat is bad. Dietary fat is bad." And that's a good thing to remember. Okay, so let's continue with Gasset. The fact is that the typical student is one who does not feel the direct need of science, nor any real concern with it, and who yet sees himself forced to busy himself with it. The student of this type is a falsification of the man. This, which may have sounded so stupefying when we first pronounced it, becomes the essential tragedy of the teaching profession, and in my judgment, the reform of education ought to begin with that brutal paradox. Okay. And that's what I said earlier, that basically medical education, pre-med education in most of med school, it's fake. It's fake in the sense that the majority of diseases are all related to nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology. But those three subjects are not taught in pre-med or in med school. So calculus has nothing to do with medicine. Zero, nothing. Okay, let's continue with Gasset. Because the activity itself, the activity which pedagogy regulates, and which we will call studying, is mainly false. Something happens that is not as much emphasized as it should be. Namely, that in no order of life is the element of falsity so constant, so habitual, so tolerated as it is in teaching. The student does not study, and if he does, putting his best will into it, he does not learn. And it is clear that if the student, for whatever reason, does not learn, the professor cannot say that he is teaching. At the very best, he is trying to teach, but not succeeding. And so the terrible gap, which began at least a century ago, continues to grow. The gap between the living culture, genuine knowledge, and the ordinary man. Man will remain intact as he was. That is to say, he will remain uncultured, a barbarian. So what I'm basically saying here is he's talking sort of about philosophy and civilization and life and all that, literature and culture and all this, but I would bring it to medicine. I would basically say, in a sense, what he's saying is true about doctors. in terms of your ability to treat disease, if you don't know nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology, how can you approach obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and atherosclerosis? Those are dietary diseases also related to toxicology. So, yes, it is true. Most pre-med and med school education and residency education with regard to the chronic diseases is fake because it ignores the essential components of it. And also what he's basically saying, most school is fake. And that is true. Think back to your grade school and high school. What does anybody remember from grade school and high school? I've talked to a lot of people about this, and about the only thing most people remember is, how to type. And then if you were lucky, you might have had one or two good teachers, or more if you're lucky. I had a couple English teachers who I really liked. Some that were nice to me, some that simply encouraged a lot of interesting reading stuff. Introduced me to Edgar Allan Poe, introduced me to other interesting writers, Ralph Waldo Emerson and some other ones that I really liked. So they had a real positive influence on me. Most of my other stuff, I just forgot it. Okay, Gasset continues. In order for me to understand a science, it is not enough to study. It is also necessary that I should genuinely feel the need for this, that I be truly preoccupied with its questions. Only then will I understand its answers. No one can thoroughly understand an answer unless he has understood the question to which it replies. Fundamentally, true teaching of science is especially teaching the need for true scientific knowledge. Okay, this is Jose Ortega Gasset. So, like, some of where that comes from is you couple things. Number one, to really get good at something, like Goethe had said, in order for a man to learn a complex topic, he must love it. Because if you love the subject, you'll push through the tedium and keep on building to a higher level. At another level, I can remember when I would rotate through things like OB-GYN, pediatrics, whatever, I would try to get myself psyched up that maybe I'll go into this. I'll give it an open mind. Maybe I'll go into it. And I just know from experience, if you tell yourself, maybe I'll go into this field that you're rotating through in your clinical rotations in med school, you remember everything better. Okay. All right, so let's continue a little more with Gasset. I found this real helpful, so I know I'm kind of going on and on, but I thought this was pretty cool. Okay. The average man studies because he is forced to and not because he wants to learn, and he does not learn. Okay, we covered that. The root structure heritage of modern science and culture is not learned by the average man. And underneath the superficial veneer of modernity, he remains an uncultured barbarian, prone to violence. This has led to humanity's return to barbarism. Barbarism is the absence of standards to which an appeal can be made. And I think we've all seen this. Just go on the internet and watch some videos of areas where things are not civilized. And you will see this still exists in the modern world. It is very common in other countries, in third world countries, and you will see that it is coming to the USA more and more. This is very unfortunate, but that's reality. Okay, Gasset continues. The mass crushes beneath it everything that is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Yes, that's another important point, is that I wanted to become a genius, so I studied all the geniuses that I could, and they all have some problem, personality problem, or they're crazy or something, and if you don't want to accept that, you won't have any genius. But what I'm trying to get at is, anybody that tries to do anything really good, they get attacked, okay? So there's a tremendous peer pressure to be conformist, and it isn't just in grade school, in high school, it continues all through life. Like a simple thing, like I wanted to be a good student of diagnostic radiology. When I would sit in the front row as a first-year resident, none of the other first years sat in the front row. No one else in the entire program would take notes, and I would kind of get mocked for that, but I was like, I'm the best student in the group. Why should I care what you say? So that was kind of always my attitude was, I care what the best people do. I want to be like them. I don't care what average people do. If people want to be mediocre, let them wallow in it. I could care less. But I think that's an important attitude, because I would have arguments, with my wife about raising the kids. I would have like a philosophical approach to education, and she's like, "Oh, you're crazy. You're autistic." Most people sort of see education as you go to school, you get a good grade, and then you get a good job. Okay, and yeah, that's part of it, but if you have a philosophical appreciation for it, like when I studied biochemistry, I had the attitude of biochemistry is the language of God that he uses to write the book of life, and I'm very privileged to have an opportunity to study this, and I need to learn this well so that I might understand life on earth and health and disease and all these other things. So for me, I love studying biochemistry. Okay, in retrospect, now that I know what I know, I would emphasize metabolism. All right, let's see. A little more Jose Ortega Gasset. Falling in love is an inferior state of mind, a form of transitory imbecility. Okay, I like the Jules Renard quote that it's like an hourglass. When the heart fills up with love, the mind empties out of thought. Okay, Gasset continues. The most radical division that it is possible to make of humanity is that which splits it into two classes of creatures. Those who make great demands upon themselves, piling up difficulties and duties, and those who demand nothing of themselves, but for whom to live is to be every moment what they already are, without imposing on themselves any effort towards perfection, mere buoys that float on the waves. Okay, I like that quote too. It reminds me of the Schopenhauer quote about if you want to ever achieve anything, you have to push yourself. And the idea of for the average person, the will is simply to fill their belly and to reproduce themselves, versus if a man is going to be a creative person, it's sort of like a sun that illuminates the world, that lights the world. Yeah, you have to have that philosophic mindset if you want to do high-level creative work. And he would define, different types of aristocracies: aristocracies of wealth, aristocracies of power, aristocracies of the intellect. The man who reads for pleasure, the man who reads for insight. Okay, so anyways, continuing with Gasset. Our life is at all times, and before anything else, the consciousness of what we can do. The metaphor is probably the most fertile power possessed by man. Okay, and here's another good quote by Jose Ortega Gasset. I am myself plus my surroundings, and if I do not preserve the latter, I do not preserve myself. Wow, that kind of relates to preserving your country, don't you think? Okay, so anyways, I like Gasset because Gasset's philosophy helps you, everybody finds himself, like I said, in the midst of a disappointment, a setback, a frustration, and you have to bounce out of the gutter, if you will. And Gasset gets you to think in a good way. That's why I like his philosophy. It's like Christian stoicism. All right, so here is a lady, sort of shipwrecked, The Rock of the Ages. This is one by Johannes Ortel. And there's some other versions of this painting, and they're great. And sort of it's like the salvation through Christianity and Christ. It's beautiful. Okay, and so kind of what I'm doing here, too, with this book is I wanted to make the point that Christian art is a comprehensive system. You've got the paintings, the literature, the sculpture, the Bible, the religious scripture, and all this stuff, and it all goes together, and it's all kind of beautiful. So, anyways, that was the topic for today: Shipwrecked and the philosophy of Jose Ortega y Gasset. Hope that was interesting or useful for you.